everyone, Valentine's Day is just around the corner, and I hope you all get to celebrate it with someone special, whether it's with your partner, a friend, or just some time for yourself. I hope it's filled with love and happiness. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy the story, and don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell for future updates. I am a young lady aged 20, and I have been staying on the West Coast for a total of 8 months now. At the beginning of my first month, I began working in a restaurant that the delivery guys frequented. At the restaurant itself, I was so busy that I didn't even see the guy who was working there until I became less busy. However, I was to be the one to serve goods that day, and he had already been in at least 2 times. I had just shared the food with him without even looking at him. Then he asked me a question. He said, "Why don't you even say hello?" On his face, he wore a big smile that I used to see on my friend whom I last met. I got nervous really quickly. I smiled back and told him it was a good night. He rolled his eyes again and went to his car. This guy came back after a while with his phone. He was asking my phone number. In the beginning, I was like, no, but he wanted it too much. He got so close. The restaurant was not busy at that time. Hence, I was under pressure to think of something quick. So I wrote a fake number on a napkin. He took it and called the first number directly. As for me, I called him, and after saying that I was sorry, he was the one that gave me the new number. I just moved here from the East Coast, and I found it pretty hard to explain my long number together with my P. I became crazily fearful. This was me. I was giving him my name, and I didn't wear a name tag while picking up the phone. If you call for me to answer it, I now know whether he was playing pranks or did not know, but I proved my number was mine by calling him through the trial connection. And so I let my phone ring begin. The very first thing that crossed my mind was that this was the most dumb decision I had ever made. I planted my cell phone with his name on it, and he left. I was elated with the job I had because I was able to communicate with customers and assist them in a way that I found fulfilling. However, my long and arduous journey home on the bus being the major factor in that made it somewhat difficult. Primarily because I had to connect 2 buses, which usually took me an hour to come back home without a great deal of risk, thus usually arriving at the office at around 11. 0 o'clock completing the work. By that time, instead of asking for a pickup using the phone, it happened that I was guided more by curiosity. Thus I thought the cover shift, the voice went directly to my ear saying, "It is a bit strange for the best feeling all around." So she was able to convince me to join all of them, except of course for tomorrow night. Perhaps when my friends were being taken home with us, my house was just lucky that it was very close to the bus stop. Therefore, I had the opportunity to quickly hang up on him just after the bus came. For a couple of months, I was a target of my neighbor who was sitting in the front of the bus, the one who called me so many times and texted me those good things. But I had considered them to be disturbing too, like when he came out with the proposition of giving me money as if I was able to do a good deal for him. I have complained about this to my boss, who told him off in the instance. Then I started walking early for work, and on my way, I unintentionally met my neighbor brainstorming without listening to any music on or chatting with a friend. I was so scared. He was putting his friendly arm around me, and we could walk together like he wanted to my new job that is the nearest one to me. I needed to find an excuse that I was busy, thus I made it into the bakery full of workers until he left. Also, it was irritating to receive such calls most of all the time, especially the frequency increased again. Once a boy sent me voicemail messages so troubling that they were stuck in my mind. So I thought, what if I tried something new with him? I told him I was gay. He responded by saying, sure, I could give him a chance. At first I tried to ignore his messages for a little while, but then one day it started all over again. Like, "You are so hot," and "I would do so many things with you" were some of the comments. But when I blocked him, he set up new accounts and kept messaging me. On Valentine's Day at 3 a.m., he kept shouting my name outside my house. It was a beautiful night, and I had left the window open thinking it would be my cover. He made me aware that I was in his sight, and therefore I wanted to talk to him. It was only at the time of his departure that he uttered a statement that I would keep in my memory for the rest of my life. I can't help but think about it. By the age of 16, I was a barista at a cafe close to my home. and it was imperative that I wear a smile on my face and be friendly, even when I had to deal with dumb behaviors. Sometimes, some men interpreted my open face as a sign of their affection, but this person was exceedingly creepy. It was a Sunday afternoon when he came into the shop when I was in that place alone. He looked like an ordinary guy, but was wearing a leather jacket. He ordered a plain cup of coffee, and he paid with a coin. After that, he came closer to me. I rebuffed him with a laugh and handed him his coffee. He claimed to know me, but I had never seen him before. I twitched my lips nervously, and I laughed, but he was odd and asked me if I had any particular university in mind. My answer was negative to all the establishments he recommended as a means of recalling my past school. Unavoidably, fear was present. He was insistent that he had seen me on campus. After the time elapsed, no options were readily available. I had an odd sensation in me. I told him to return. I waited in a cafe once. There was a guy who came on that day. He appeared like 5 times. He did attempt to make me laugh, but I was not the least premised by it. I requested him to leave. He, on the other hand, coolly asked when we finished. I replied 2 a.m. To be honest, I was looking for a less annoying person to deal with. He vacated, but I thought, that is the end of it. The latter week, I was instructed by my boss to view the video surveillance of the cameras. On the hour 2 a.m., there was the same character. He was seen peering into the shop. That was, to tell you the least, really scary. I am uncertain as to what his maintenance of the presence was, though he never returned to my place. My 11 years of harassment story started in close proximity to the Pacific Ocean. I was 23 years old and had my own living quarters but no boyfriend. The period of Valentine's was approaching and my workmate introduced me to Jack. Yet, he went on to be a bit elusive. He was a tad needy. He would want me to exclude my family and place him first. He also made a note of me refusing to talk up about my other schedules and was adamant only that I resolve it. One time, 1 month from when we started dating, he worded that he was in love with me. I swallowed the bait. It seemed to me he was joking. One night, he even declared himself so ready to marry me. Yet, I pointed out that we had just met. I tell him that way. He hurried to wed the young lady. There weren't any rings. The boy begged again, saying he was now ready. I was confused. I hardly knew him well. I was about studying and working. I proposed a time out. He looked just a little crazy, but he laughed. After some days, I found him on my wide staircase. I told him to leave. He followed me while I was not in a place. I kept my distance. The calls from him admonished me so. After 2 months, he stopped. At last, I could be in peace. I took Jack's call. He was addressing me to meet him. Added to that, he also said his mom wanted to see me. The feeling creeped me out. I told him over the phone that he had to cease the calling. Unjustifiable to me, he knocked a lot on my door. I revealed my family and friends the disconnection news. Jack was back. He came to my friend and persuaded him to open the gate for him. I could find a secret for the lack of trees. My friend answered it no. He was like a bull trying to get into the china shop. My friend got to me. I sprinted to shut the door tight. I let him know that if he didn't cease acting as he did, I would complain to the police. The police came not. The policeman did not appear as well. I consider when I couldn't call the police any much better. I did not enter my house for a few months, having my sisters visit. I lay on my bed to hear them squeal, enjoying the movie. Children were playing in a park outside. Strangely, I pressed the aspirin again and then dropped it. A loud bang woke me up. First, I thought that perhaps a child was playing with a ball. But the next bang came, and my sister howled. What the hell was that? As I arose to take a look, I caught the sound of screaming. A man yelled, "Get the hell up!" A surge of panic washed over me. I slammed the door of my room and called 911. The rapid arrival of the cops seemed the most appropriate solution. I told the operator that there was someone in my house. The intruders were the ones I was most afraid of, as they were the ones who were targeting my sisters. I made a speedy plan. I had been absent-minded about intruders. I was in bed with my mother. I would be as scared as what is thought in a fear simulation, as I have never had any contact with terrorism, but I am preparing for it. My only wish is that it is not my family that does not survive. Point 911 was my lifeline. and I was crying that Jack was kicking the door, and he, at the same time, was begging me to open the door. He was talking about killing my family if I didn't open the door. It felt like minutes were hours, but in fact, they were only 5 minutes. Jack bolted, and he said to my sister that the door was now open. A week later, Jack, drug dealing with a shotgun in my room, was arrested. The police had a hand in stopping him earlier, when he was reported to be firing a gun in the air. Without providing the police with the address of a family member, I was an enormous help in their inquiry. The police nabbed him at the place he confessed to. The whole time I was avoiding him. He had broken into my house. He served 5 years for this. I was relocated. I was terrified. He moved to an area nearby the halfway house. He was, again, the one. Honestly, I am still shaking with fear. I don't know where he is going to come from. I never stop. Sometimes my change of the number is so frequent that it seems it is the only thing that makes a difference to me. Every time I have all types of pepper sprays and high-tech tasers with me. Doors and windows must be securely closed at night. I put a big chair under the doorknob. To be honest, I was 20 years and I lived with my uncle free. I was taking my nieces full-time and helped a lot in the tasks. I got a job at a very well-known coffee shop looking over the tourist area. I felt safe there because I had many friends from around and co-workers. I used to take a walk after work near the Riverwalk. I and my colleagues were like one big family. One of the co-workers, a guy, was leaving after a lengthy period of time and we were seeing him off on that day. During my break, I just went into a drugstore for a farewell note for a coworker. On the way, however, I noted someone following me. He was tall and looked like Lakeith Stanfield. He asked for my phone number and I declined. At that point, he pressed me to give him my number, so I told him to let me go, which seemed to shock him. I should also say that the next day when I came back to the store, he was nowhere to be seen. I disclosed it to my coworkers and we all made fun of it. But after that, he was the idiot I was seeing all the time. I suspected he was a trifler because he always just loitered around me. I have my shifts varied, meanwhile he was still there. I got kind of paranoid because he just stared at me without making any order or talking to me. It was creepy. The colleagues were asking about a guy who was staring at me in the first place. One of the group leaders adopted the idea of doing the washing of the dishes so that I would not be with him. Although once a colleague walked me to my car, the other time he called me by my first name when he ordered water, after which he was alone to say so. My manager had heard of him, but he had not been clumsy with me up to that point. The next time in working out with my manager and 2 other people, I told my manager I had to go to the toilet. That was a tricky start because the toilets right next to it were not visible. I did the restroom near him. When I passed by him, he stood up. He too had been to the bathroom, which was then locked. So I was left with no option but to tell the person who knocked that it was occupied. After all, no one was there when I got out of the door that opened. When I came back out, I again saw him settling in his chair at the table. Just like that, I got distressed and told my boss about it later on. But my boss couldn't do anything then because of the unavailability of proofs against him. A warning was given to this man by my boss where he stated that he was not going to allow him to take the coffee again. In place of it, he drank coffee that was not intended for him. He later apologized and he was just observing me as I was cutting the flowers. Valentine's Day was just around the corner and I was tidying up at the shop. It was just about 1 a.m. I was cleaning very well. And when I ended up cleaning the toilet, I noticed the man staring at me from behind the window. He was looking at me with a burning intensity and I froze for some time. Then I called for Hannah, my team leader. She was to come. I told her that the man was looking at me. She yelled at the man to go inside or she'd call the police, but he ignored her. He used to just gaze at me. I decided to retreat back in the bathroom. My boss shouted that man, expelling him and threatening the police call. After a short delay, he went, but my boss told me not to file a report with cops the next day. My friend insisted that I should file a report anyways. So I texted my boss that I am terrified, and I was reporting it. I called 911 and 2 adorable officers came to hear my side of the story. They told me I should call immediate. They added that the man was liable for harassment. I felt fear and relief. They mentioned that if the man came back, I should ring 911 so they could arrest him for trespassing. My boss asked that guy to leave the coffee shop. Several months after this incident, in which I saw him again along with my friends. I took my friends out not far from my workplace. I ducked into a store for cover. During the high school days, I was a part of a small Texas town. This was the town where everybody was related or hated each other. None of my family was from that area. It was my blonde girlfriend who made me feel like an outsider. There were small disagreements that we had. To avoid complications on Valentine's Day, we tried not to be present at the dance. His parents were out, so we decided to watch a movie at her house. The car borrowed to us was her father's Honda. We were heading home after renting the movie and taking some ice cream from Dairy Queen. Her place was a hidden place. We even had a blizzards event until a car's headlights flickered on the inside of our car. Hands and head from the other car were the first things I noticed the moment I saw. A wave of coldness swept over me. When I took out my pocket knife, my girlfriend was the one who noticed it first. She asked me about it. I attempted to make an adequate excuse that I wanted to cut my ninth friend's house, but she completely saw through my lies very well, so I had no other way but to park the car and took off my seatbelt. Trust the basis of the friendship, similar to the fact that I worked with the boy in my school. I thought that he was my guy. I was a boy I yelled at. The next time I saw him was a first for me because he was in the boot of my car without saying a word, jumped up in surprise. I asked him, "Hey, what's your name?" I said, "What are you doing in the car?" He answered, "I thought you were going to the party and I requested a lift from you guys." To be honest, I was in such a conflict over this issue the split of a second. I couldn't help but feel terrified because I've never seen a boy, so I just stared at him. We dropped him off at the party finally. When we were leaving the dance, he invited us inside. We, however, wouldn't initially go because this interruption was not normal for my girlfriend at all, and she was just telling me about it again. The story of the contact the cafe we went to for donuts told her was how she gayed it. Although I had moved to another place, I stayed for a long time with the same brand of my former company. As a result, I was a donut maker, and on a few occasions. Indeed, I even made our yeast rings, which were locally made by us. Next, I followed another branch. One time, I was on the job. There was a big array of donuts like those advertised on television. They were simply eye-catching. Also, brownie batter donuts were there as a delicious option. The business was hopping. Jeremy was the manager that day. He got up and down between the tables. He seemed troubled. I approached him to ask what the matter was and got the answer that somebody found staples in the donuts. Our shop was on the verge of injury and one of our staff members could have been hurt. Our store was not pleased with it. Luckily, I began to feel sick only after we sold all the old unfinished orders. A child might have just eaten one of those. A family would have come over from the house to the shop on Saturday morning. A family of all sizes to buy sweets and drinks. I provided the worst case scenario. With the perspective of hindsight, it is clear that this incident had no media coverage. I wish that it had been covered up somehow. I begged the police to catch the person responsible for this. A few months into high school, I tried to reconnect with my friends from middle school, especially Karina. Each time I texted her, I repeated the same process of not keeping her number, only remembering it ended with 77. One night in the course of my school moving process, I received a text from her asking how everything was. I had a long chat with her, and when we finished, I did not have a thought about it as I had a number ending in 77. However, it was odd that she kept on suggesting I should phone her. I do not like talking on the phone, and thus I did not make the call. While I was waiting at my mother's office, feeling utterly bored, Karina again asked me to call her. I finally said, "All right." Hence, out of boredom, I called her number. The other day, I attempted to reach out to a girl named Karina, but I was shocked that a strange man was the one who picked up the phone. I thought he might be her older brother. I asked him if Karina was around, but he looked confused when he asked me which girl was that. Since I was totally confused, I said, "Oh no, wrong number," and hang up the call. I received a message from Karina soon later asking me whether I had entered the correct number or not. I ignored her messages that day. A few weeks later on Facebook, a guy named Adam sent me a friend request. He was among the only two friends who were mutual to us, and we both studied in the same school class. I accepted his request as I was a freshman and wanted to make new friends. Out of nowhere, he messaged me to ask me why I had not responded to his invitation yet. I replied that it was because I had confused him for Karina, as the two had digits ending with 77. He started sending me bizarre messages like "you're so cute" and "I love you," although we barely knew each other. I frequently changed my profile picture, and he noticed that immediately afterward. He had no reservations about being the first to compliment me on how great I looked in my profile. Things were getting increasingly uncomfortable for me as Valentine's Day approached. He continually asked me whether I wished him to gift me one, and I, of course, declined politely. He did not take it for a no and began to bombard me with texts such as "you look hot," and the next thing he would do is to ping me a message with pictures of thongs and bras. Finally, on Valentine's Day, he was like, My conversation with Adam was definitely in the ballpark for being honest. I confessed to him my feelings for him and was the cause of his annoyance, but then he continued to bombard me with messages daily. In April, I was out with some friends at the movies when suddenly I spotted Adam coming out of the elevator, which scared me. Therefore, I had to call my brother for help hiding from Adam. It was also a matter of the fact I had never told Adam so. In spite of this, I again bumped into Adam at Hot Topic. I texted Rio that Adam was from there. Rio said maybe he had lightly remarked about our movie plans. When they finally arrived, I felt so lucky to see all of them, including Rio, Kelly, and all the other friends I knew. It was a very safe feeling that we all walked to the cinema together, the blessing I was thankful for. I kept my distance from Adam in the movie. He complained that he wasn't talked to by anyone. I said he shouldn't have come here. The next day, he was texting me, blaming me for ignoring him. I was so angry. I told then that he was arriving the last time for me. I told him how uncomfortable he made me feel, and that resulted in me blocking his number. Now we fast forward to summer. I received a friend request from Adam. I guessed I had unfriended him, but it turned out he was of the other account. I blocked both of them, and in sophomore year, I told Leon, my boyfriend, my concerns. He wondered how Adam could get my number. That question made me feel very frighteningly uncomfortable. The thought had not entered my mind to ask R whether he had given it to him. I do not believe it though. So the dilemma I was left with was where Adam, the person I had little interaction with, got my number. To specify a little more, my name is Kat, John's mom, Karen. It took me a month to come here. Moving quickly was the scary part. Some of you will note me trying to remember the past events of just over 1 year ago. I do not recall every detail correctly, and I of course made some mistakes which I have mentioned several times. It does not help me to be critical of my own decisions right now, and I expect your politeness. This is a narrative from more than a year ago. Valentine's Day was a hard day when I was broken up by a very long-term boyfriend via a text message. I was taken by surprise and was so ashamed. Soon after the breakup, I started to look for another partner as a temporary distraction. At the time, I met John on Tinder. We actually had undeniable chemistry. I was a first-year biology student at the university, while he was a history student at another university. He was very smart, very nice, and there were lots of things we shared in common. Although he did make me feel a bit weird at first, which could be taken as a sign of his neediness, I was also feeling uneasy due to my already broken relationship with my boyfriend. Thus, I did not care for it at all. We chatted for just about 2 days, and then he asked me out to a theater play. I found the date quite scenic and interesting, and thus I was quite thrilled. The date was delightful. He, for a small fraction of it, shared the subway ride with me, and we had a little chat about my ex-boyfriend. He pointed out potentially as a solvable example that he could not believe that a person like me, a pretty girl, could be rejected. John led me to believe that he would do anything to be my boyfriend. But now that I think about it, that was such a trivial and implausible thought. I was just so thankful for a friend who saw the huge mistake my ex had made. So we were keeping in touch via texting and going on occasional dates. At first, I thought I was very flattered because he revealed to me his depression, which was then such a great problem for him. After my breakup, I too was depressed. We went through the hard times together. We became the closest of friends very quickly, even though we had only been dating for a short while. I thought I was in love with him. However, the real problem was his mother, Karen. Perhaps his mother's overbearing parenting was partially responsible for his depression. Everything he told me he had confided in his mother. When he came to my house, he forgot to set the alarm. He became awake and looked at the clock when he realized he had received many calls from her. She even called all the hospitals trying to find him. The root of her worries was his much longer sleep span than what he had initially reported to her. He had to be the one who could change his thoughts. His mom would convince him, yes, it was soon time for him to join in at my family's reunion. This was a great occasion. I wanted him to make a good impression on my eye, met his family only a couple of days before we were to get married. Not that I had ever been avoiding, furthermore, I had never been a role play person. He kept on asking me to wear a teacher's outfit and act as his teacher beforehand. His inseparability with his mother caused him to do everything only after he had the nod of his mom. I told him this is the wrong kind of treatment underneath me. I gave him the assurance that it was on his end that he needs to stop this behavior of my giving him a kind of treatment. After all, if he persisted in what he was doing, we could not argue. When I was really sad, he came over and just held me, so I told him that back in the day, it was not a new thing. At the end of 1 month of going out, he was the one who said, "Will you marry me?" And I couldn't make out if it was real. I thought it was one of those jokes, but he stood there, serious. It made me uneasy, apart from the fact that I told my friends about it. I found it strange that she was the one who left him. He was mentally fragile, and I was dependent on his help with everything. I chose to ignore the problems I had. He called me ugly and told me I was mentally ill, which made me feel bad about ending the relationship. The very first time I went to his home, I met his mother. When she walked in, she coldly scanned me instead of shaking hands with me. She was not interested in me. Also, she kissed like he did on the mouth, and she called he sweetly as he did. However, I was shocked that she had the same breathing glasses as were his. Being in such a complex situation was uncomfortable for me. The only event that the girl babysitting the baby was phony. She laughed at me for being unable to do it, and rather than assisting me, she made me struggle with it. I wanted to be courageous and talk back, but he silenced us both. One evening I got a text from New saying that he was feeling low. I was to have a midterm exam, so I told him that I would come to him after the exam, but he came straight to my building. I was the one who was nervous about going to the parking spot. I attempted to leave, but he poignantly grabbed my arm to make me ask him why. When I stated that it gave me unsettling feelings, he was still in the method of pulling me in the parking lot. I was terrified and confused about his intentions. My arm is being pulled tightly by no one else to help me. I am frightened of doing this right now. No, him being cold, I would cry at this particular moment, and I am confused and very afraid. Speaking with my mom, is a cat, in the driveway is a car. She is going to the police, that you are mad if I do not enter the car with you now. They will come here and make a big deal out of nothing. My head was spinning. I really did not want to be in this situation. The police came to me when I was in the university residence hospital before, and they called my name. I should not go again, the doctor told me so. I was walking on campus. I was too confused and felt betrayed by my boyfriend's threats. In my mind weighed the pros and cons supporting him would cause less trouble. I tell him, you are blackmailing me and I won't be with you long if you continue like this. He keeps on threatening me, so I get into his car. And the mother Karen has a smirk just as ugly as herself. I was about to call the police. She said John was next to me, got into the back seat as she drove shock wore off. And I became aware that I was very much in trouble. What can I do? I started yelling at Karen for manipulating her son and being a bad mother. Karen screamed at me for being a bad girlfriend. We had the most intense argument ever. I hate confrontation. I was surprised at how angry I was. Adrenaline made me crazy. Karen stopped the car suddenly. I was about to get out. However, she threatened to report me to the police. I stopped in my tracks. They would believe her. She was older and better known. They wouldn't believe me, a mentally unhinged looking hood rat. You know that I was also suffering from mental issues. Karen did threaten me that if I ever get out of here one more time, she told me that she will report to the police that I had hit her and her son. I cracked. John did not try to defend me or to say anything. I cried and cried, asking for forgiveness, saying I wouldn't do it again. Karen said I could go, but really I had no place to go. I apologized to Karen, and let her take me back to her place. I tried to reach out to my mate via text. Unfortunately, she was not having any of it. We reached home at the small hours of the morning. My phone had gone blank. We never talked on the way as Karen just cracked jokes about everything. The reason was my gloomy mind so as not to respond. The only way out was for John to take me by the hand and lead me into the house. I was crying really badly. They kept whispering "shut up" to me. I think if Karen could beat me instead of hearing my whining, she would. I stopped crying only when we got to the living room. John led me to the room he used to go to when he had a day off. He asked me if I wanted to go and see a movie with him. However, laying down on the bed with my teary mood was the only thing that I could do. He was in my room, but I went out to the world. He was pretending to watch a movie and wanted me to believe it was to help me. If John keeps me safe, I wouldn't harm myself. We are safe and strong enough to be together. John was silent all the while. The one stepped in and looked at me strangely and left at the end. John's mom told me to shut my eyes and stop shedding tears. She expressed that her trying to help us was a sign of her care for us. I chose silence. My only reaction was touching the dog while avoiding eye contact with her. She screamed at me. John whispered for me not to give her the satisfaction of seeing my emotions, or I was angry. Not long after, she denigrated me and called me a fool, accused me of being an autistic person too. Her work is helping teenagers with disabilities, although she is the most difficult to work with me. It was pretty clear to her. I can take insults, but calling me that my mom is abusive is going too far. She told me I was the one that had to bear that. No way should someone talk trash about my mom. John said instead of me, she should have been the one to speak of the time my mom abused me. Her argument was that she was so much better than us. I was saying that Elizabeth was the one that needed to be compared to her, so I lost it and shouted at her. The exchange of screaming was furious. I dropped the idea of being with John and told him. Then John called his mom, and she dismissed me in a bad mood. We were finally all in pajamas, all tucked in bed. He wrapped me into a cocoon of sleep, fearing harm at his hands. I longed for the touching of my body with him. I was feeling sick, as if there was some kind of mistake somewhere. I wanted to go back home. It was like living in a cage. I stood up and escaped towards the door. He got me back as Karen stood in the doorway. I wailed. My tears fell freely as I hit the ground and called, "Go of me." I can't recall telling Karen, but it is just that she called me dirty and left. John took me to his room and shut the door without any ceremony. His mother brought a pill that was intended to put me to sleep. I turned her down. Then, she was a real nuisance because she wouldn't just leave me. My gut told me to keep my trust. John found out how safe the pills were by taking one, and a little while later, I had to take one. I pretended to have taken the medication when, in reality, it was the opposite of that. She made me. The medical drug was so strong that it made me fall asleep in a hurry. Way back in time, I could still hear the parts of the story from last night. That awful mixture made me feel sick. A shapeless, transparent plastic bag was a solution to the whisper of enigmatic bitterness I felt. The thought of John and his mom starting breakfast as soon as I entered the kitchen made the way of escaping seem great. In the panic of the morning, I quickly pulled my phone out thinking it was out of battery, just as he had hidden it. The transport was public and I had to put cash on hand, so I put my wallet in my pocket. The door slid away in silence and I caged. The fright of running was more than I was afraid of. The only one was the dog that didn't bark. My home was practically inaccessible and I didn't know how to get back. I was looking for a bus stop. Even fate played with us. I couldn't stop myself from yelling, "This driver transferred me," while I sat there with my head down and cried. I was very upset. How do I go? The bus takes the Times subway. From this, I would go home. I came into the subway too fast. I looked just awful. My clothes were dirty. The subway was at my school. Because of John, I could not go home. He would inform the police that I told someone on the subway that I needed. My friend was unaware of my mobile number. My eyes were red because I cried, but I told her all. The friend got my message but failed to locate me at home. I would have liked it if I could go to her place once it came. Many messages from John told me that he needed me. I made a major error. Now I wonder why I just went to the hospital to see him. They inquired about my depression and I said no, including I was not threatened by them, that I had the right to do so since I was an adult. This was the case as I was of the law, and I could now go if I wished. At John's house, I was sad and lonely. His mother said the nurses thought I was faking it. I hurried out with a feeling of being caged. I ended up sleeping on my friend's bed for a week. John's friend claimed that I was an innocent victim of his depression. I blocked their number. Also, I do not know if John is okay. I never informed the police about it. Since Karen appeared to the cops as a more credible person than me, I never filed a report. Some people expressed that I was not kidnapped. However, they insisted that I should have done it. Besides, they attempted to use drugs on me too. When I was 16, I had my parents overjoyed by the flower delivery. After arriving home, I thought of us and walked the paths that took me to school, including the few driving clinics where I thought the cluster would be the smallest. I remember that day. It was Valentine's Day. I went to the hospital and discovered the shops in the hospital sold flower arrangements for Valentine, not only for the beloved ones, but also for those with loving hearts full of devotion for these florists, little buds like. Thus, as there was no car, here it seemed rather hard to do. But I was able to get the florist instead. Since this is my reason for coming to that hospital, I took the train to fetch one anyway. Your return home was blessed with smoothness and without any problems, except for that ugly old car of the 90s that was flailing its way behind me, out of control at one time. In my opinion, the situation would have been acceptable or even good if the dagger by a chanced overtaking exercise that I had to go through wasn't so needless. Yet, my efforts bore no fruit. The power of the car going so slowly behind the one that is a little bit annoyed makes me feel like maybe it is not even a fellow traveler, but rather my personal stalker. With big strides in my little running shoes, I couldn't even spill water in the water vase I was carrying. If a mistake took place between me taking the freedom of choice to walk and the car chasing me, the one chaining me would be the one to pay for it. I looked behind and saw the car some distance back, but then the gas was pressed to the throttle and the car surged ahead, trying hard to leave do not and catch me. So, I was now excessively a prisoner of the venue to the point where I approached the one person and the one thing I really wanted to do. Be the hero who was among the many waiting for a hero. The introduction of the story was a chase in the parking lot, nothing more. The person driving the car was not interested in parking, but rather in following me around. I had to jump over a pile of rubble to avoid the driver. Looking from above, I could thus view the high school, and when I hopped over a pile of them, the car was already gone. It was amazing. It was unstoppable. I didn't belong to the class that was indifferent to these kinds of worries, in contrast to the others. The topic was how human trafficking was being practiced in our community. I just breathed and gone chilled. I was among the friends it was in the lounge. The car that I saw on the way I had passed showed that it had something unnatural. I have read some reports that stated that human trafficking is carried out on the internet using social networking sites like Facebook. The vehicle could have been identifiable only by a teacher, thus my default faculty. I had to seek for help. Besides that, I was also very much dazed and weak and did not think so. If I were to leave the campus escorted by a teacher and I couldn't tell any of my friends, and most importantly, I was very anxious because I thought that the staff would not permit me to leave the campus. Initially, I doubted whether I correctly understood and interpreted what I read or I exaggerated. I didn't even know how to explain my situation to the police if I had to call them. It is impossible for me to tell the model of the car as I am not into cars, nor can I say anything about the people who were on it. I was afraid of my parents restricting me more if they ever found out that I was in trouble without anyone knowing it. It is horrible to keep secrets. I also lived in fear that my keeping quiet caused a person to get hurt or die. Other than parents running away or senior citizens being missed, no other types of missing people were reported, particularly men and women who disappeared long ago in the past. It was Valentine's Day, and I, together with my girlfriend, were out as college students at a small university in Kentucky, where it is quite tough for the students to pay for their cars on campus. Mostly, we just walk even if we have bicycles. My girlfriend and I decided to have Taco Bell together. When I said that I would pay, all the drivers were out of service, I was forced to walk 2 miles through the freezing weather just to go get the food. Most people wouldn't be caught dead to the street in such weather, but I just had no money at that moment. I started right after my girlfriend heaved a kiss on my lips. Walking on the campus of the university, which is like a small town, was easy. I then went out of the campus and a different environment got into the residential area where some houses were located. A quarter of the way, I noticed a guy wearing a trench coat. I felt uneasy because nobody should be walking in such hostile conditions. That man surely was the one who enjoyed the cold. I walked over to the different side of the road. We didn't talk. I was continually fidgeting, being careful. He was following me at a distance. That man was now also coming my way, but he was in a hurry. There I was also hurrying. At the end of the day, we walked together. The man raised his voice while he yelled something. A metallic-looking object that he was covering fell out of his sleeve. I immediately reacted by feeling the need to protect myself by taking my pocket knife when he was walking over to me. At 14 years of age, I and my twin sister attended a new school after changing schools. I was in Spanish class with Tony. He was a charming boy but was silent. We discussed our lessons. It was later on that Tony invited me for lunch, and I was so into it. He was acting so weirdly, being all nervous. Now, I am 21, and I still remember how creepy he was those days. If we look at his phone number after some texts and chats, he does not seem to have any friends, and he appears to be negative about life. He constantly gets tired of doing the same things. Thus, he appears to be very monotonous and unsatisfying. But he told me things that I had not yet heard. He was just like a hero who came to save me. I am his little lady. He also was a fan of the Scream Murderer. He is nice, but in some respects, he is not what I would like to be. As time went on, the day of love arrived. He chatted every day and he wanted me to be his Valentine. So Valentine's Day comes. He picked me up to date on how many Hershey's Kisses and Twizzlers he had bought and brought me. I don't like Twizzlers. Therefore, I gave them back to him, kissed him on his cheek, and then went to class. Yes, I admit that it was a bit mean, but I was really losing interest in him. I had told him before that I did not really like that kind of candy. Flowers, candy, more gifts were what I received from friends. I saw Tony cry. He didn't say any word. Later, he texted me that he felt stupid. Other students had taken it to the next level. I didn't respond. For weeks, our chats became less and less. It was awkward in class. He obviously was about to say something, but he didn't. My twin sister told me later that Tony would ask her daily about me, whether I'm with someone else or not. Although it was sweet that he liked me and was trying to win me over, on the contrary, I had grown weary of him. There were times that we talked. He would sometimes bring me cookies. Either he walked me to the train station or called me after school. But gradually, I gave Brandon a chance and started dating him. When Brandon and I began our relationship, Tony was devastated. Furthermore, he told his classmates that my first kiss had been with him. On the other hand, I was puzzled because we merely kissed on the cheeks. There was also a little worry that people might think we had actually dated, and that too was a fear. So I chose to still be friends with Tony. Brandon and Tony were of my grade as well. Tony was just uncertain if he was a friend of Brandon. He thought that Brandon already knew about our affair, even though I told him that there was nothing to know. Brandon was the laid-back and carefree one and did not seem at all to feel jealous, or at least at the point of view I had. On the last day of school, Tony gave me a superb notebook as a present. He loves me. Others don't think much of me. He'll treat me. I read the book and I showed the twin to it. It was disturbing for her. I did not enter and pretended normal. I would sometimes talk to him. My friends were with me. I didn't have any time. I and Tony weren't in communications anymore. He sat by himself. I found it as a normal thing. When I was given the first book by Tony, he was present. That was the last of the junior years. The other two were seniors and were Tony and Brandon. A text was sent to me. I was the very first reader. I said that I would give an opinion on it at school. He put a notebook on the table. I was purposeful. There were more than 300 pages. The theme revolved around the Game of Thrones series with Eric, Elva, and Isaac as leading roles. The real characters in the drama were us. I have an intuitive perception of their characters. In reality, the plot was weird, and especially the character of Eric, which Tony was socially awkward. On the other hand, Elva was frivolous and so giddy. And finally, Isaac was the sensible guy. This poem talks about a group of 4 people that were the same in appearance, and is a very interesting story. The first man in the party, named Tony, is a royal prince, while the 3 of the same likeness are poor. But Tony was the one who loved a girl who was gotten by her enemy named Brandon. The 2 kingdoms had a gladiator-type battle to see the better one. At the end of the day, the girl who was in love with Tony, it was a forbidden union the couple had that night. The last time they were involved was in the subsequent battle, only this time they were caught by Brandon. The girl claimed she no longer loved Tony and followed Brandon. As a form of punishment, Tony was ready to be killed in the duel. Brandon then killed the girl under the guise of a distraught lover. I was petrified at what I read. That was a strange tale, a very bizarre one at that. I had to throw it away. I never told Tony how I felt, even though he probably knew I was in love with him. The 4 of them kept on with their lives, while I was aware that I was just a stranger to them. After that, Tony did not communicate with me for years. He would message me about my feet in the late night hours. He would thus direct me towards foot fetish sites. In the end, I was forced to block him. Then she created a fetish account to come back to me. Immediately after he said he hated me and wished I would die, I changed my profile. In the beginning, I was afraid of his threats. The next day, I found out he worked in a diner, so I avoided that place. His obsession was known among the other girls as well. Turning 19 years old means that I would host a birthday party. I shall be the first of my friends to visit a bar. I found my previous high school to be more boring than entertaining. It was like a graduation ceremony that carried little weight for me. I did not attend parties during school, nor did my friends. I was a small town girl in a big school. I was invisible. The boys in my boyfriend's dorm were poking fun at me. But I was in love with my boyfriend. My boyfriend and I broke up, and I dropped out of school, which was a foolish thing to do. I accepted invitations from friends who always threw a party. They told me about house parties. In fact, on the day of my 19th birthday, I got drunk. I even invited my friends over. I have a 3-bedroom house with a garage in which I live alone. For my friends, it has been very enjoyable to have parties at my place. The garage was converted into our party area. We played beer pong. Their request was for us to party more often. My goal was to meet more people. Thus, we eventually started holding parties every weekend in our house. I performed all the cleaning and tidying up at home because I had been the one letting all kinds of people into our parties. We just did the socializing and let friends take care of drinking, and no, there were no drugs on those weekends. One day, as I was driving to work, I was disappointed to discover that the remote for my garage door was no longer in the sun visor. Instead of being frightened, I was more irritated, thinking I may have left it there while being drunk or stuff. I pressed the home button, which was on the garage remote, and then set out for work. Weirdly enough, after a while, I came back from my break and had a missed call from an unknown number. It could have been one of my friends trying to be funny, as was always the case with us back in high school. So I actually just waited for the silence to get all the way through before I hanged out, because I was not that into the pranks. Having carried out my work until the end of the day, I went to the parking lot. This was also the time when I was called another time from the same unclear number. The phone rang again. This time it was a dead silence, without even a sound that came from the other end. I was sure it was just a friend on the line. I had not missed any calls which I could not get, so my friend was aware of my work schedule well. I tried Lacey again and she told me that she had not called me. I was on the other side. My friend was with me. The first thing I did was to ignore it. The next day, I woke up at 11, feeling kind of sick. The phone rang again. I picked up the line. Empty. Then it went down on a single tone. I was getting more and more irritated by the minute, and I was also thinking my garage remote would have been missed because I was not in a good mood to locate it. I found it so annoying that I stopped looking for the missing garage remote. The unusual thing was that they were only calling me when I was free. No missed calls obtained while I was working or sleeping. The unavailable one called me a second after I came out of work or went to sleep. I thought my friends were putting me on the spot because strange things were happening to my car. I was worried that when I got in, my car was full of PETA things available from trees. Then one day, such a thing's branch was lost all the way from the tree to my door. Then I realized that I was totally freaked out and that I could stay over at my friend's house. Still, despite all the bad things happening since that day when I received the call from the unknown caller, on the other hand, I did not pick up that call. I thought it was a very annoying one and allowed it to ring until it rang for hours on that same high tone. I told my friend to ignore it. We were terrified as to whether it was an elaborate practical joke played on us or the lurking stalker. I called my boss to report it to him. He advised me to go to law enforcement if anybody did trouble me. There was an embarrassing silence rejoinder on my phone. I decided to go to the cops, but they could not find much out of it. The phone company was not so helpful. The police agreed to station someone outside my house for a few days, although they were of no assistance. During the next week, the jitteriness went away. One night, I yelled at the mystery caller. The police said someone did not prowl around my home. The following days were some branches on my lawn. In the evenings, strange tapping was the sound that bounced the window. Eventually, I stopped sleeping alone in my room. I sometimes woke in the middle of the night and stumbled as if I were drunk to the kitchen to take a drink. One of the calls was distant. The phone rang again. I was terrified, so I called Lacey to come over. I just could not figure out how someone could follow me both secretly and openly. My escort and surveillance were both invisible. There were reports such as napkins stuffed into the screen door and empty paper piles in my garden that were highly illogical. There were markers in the mailbox, and candies also appeared there unexpectedly. Many curious activities happened this time when I returned to school. Usually, I would go to my grandparents' farm for the holidays. I could be no more than at the gate when they called me. I was so furious at me that it dawned on me it was Christmas. My only plan was to spend time with my relatives. I picked the phone up with a get-lost attitude, yelling them it was Christmas and they would have to give me time to spend it with those persons. I even called them a psycho and crawled them with a thunderous request for my delay. I was crying, sobbing, and begging. But as usual, silence from the other end was the only sound at night, and I was on the couch, and a sudden bright light woke me up. It was like a torch shining in my face, because someone was shining multiple bright lights on the windows of my house. A dilemma struck me, and I was so bewildered that I just ran into the bathroom, basically locked the door, then called Lacey to come. She came, looked around, but there was nobody. I was so scared, yet with her around, I felt a little better. However, I was still receiving calls, while the police proved to be quite useless. There was nothing else coming from my house because I went back to sleep in my room, thinking maybe they have just got rid of me. After I woke up and prepared myself for the day, I went to the dining area of my house as usual. I noticed through the window that my garage door was opened. I immediately thought it just got stuck in the open position by something, but actually, it was a sensor that was made to prevent being hit without my knowledge. So, I walked towards the side door and closed it with the remote. Later on, I took a glass of milk and drank it as breakfast. Once I sat at the table, I realized my garage door remote was lying on the dining table, where it wasn't supposed to be. I was furious, dressed in my pajamas. I jumped into the car and rang Lacey to move. Earlier, we had already talked about it. Lacey and her boyfriend checked my place, but no one was home. Following that episode, Lacey and I relocated to a new city, where we rented a house in a community, where we noticed nothing strange course occurring after our arrival. On that day, which I had only invited girlfriends to and was a day for them to go out and have fun, I of course forgot my phone. We went to the movies and watched He's Just Not That Into You. Upon returning from the cinema, I was shocked to see my cell phone was laying next to my car. The whole episode was mysterious to us both. The place was too safe, and there was no indication of theft in Lacey's boyfriend's apartment, which we treated as our center, while we were there. We went back a day after, and the strange occurrences had finally stopped. None of those persons had been termed criminals up till now. My friends could not have done it that time. They are not the kind of people who would harm a fly. From that dreadful day, I have been a person with anxiety. As a student of the secondary school, I briefly worked as a florist. One day, a middle-aged man came into the shop. I presented him with a bunch of flowers. He said, "Flowers die." And then he openly confessed that he was hitting his girlfriend. He asked me, however, if I was in the right. I stated that such behavior cannot claim the heart of a woman. Just before Valentine's Day, he had shown up again. The place was pitch black, and I was the only one in it at the time. My coworker had taken the opportunity to leave for a while and go to the restroom. I felt open, like someone had their food. He had a firearm in his jacket. Knowing this, I would be forced to alert my colleague. There was nothing I could do to hold off the situation until she came out of the restroom. I wrote her a note saying that the man was the one with a pistol. After a while, she looked at me and said, "Can I call the police?" I gestured in the negative way. I was afraid if he got very angry, he would do something bad. The man's presence in the shop lasted for about a quarter of an hour. My judgment is that he had only come to see my colleague. He placed some orders for Valentine's Day. My boss asked me to help the police after I looked him up. He was using a hefty pile of $100 bills. So weird. I asked if he needed a bag, but the guy said he didn't want to cover it up that night. He had a gun under his coat. Finally, the man left. My partner and I locked the door. We could see him sitting inside his truck outside. There was no way out for us until the light van departed. To be really honest, we were scared. The man acted weirdly. He was standing too close and looking me over. It was somehow creepy. I was expecting him to disappear, but he stayed. In no time, I called my mother. I told her everything, and she was so worried and frightened. She called the police panickingly. They showed up the next day. I also told my friend about the whole incident. She confirmed that the man was her mother's client. She noticed some suspicious gossip from her mother. Her mother immediately informed the security about him. Security personnel interrogated him about the issue he caused. He said he found nothing but a glove. The police expressed anger over the fact that he reported the matter to his company first. They couldn't locate him. It was my mom who made me resign my job then. I was the most timid in middle school. It was the quiet girls left out. The main reason I was not liked was that I was a nerd. The point of difference was my passion for video games and drawing, the only thing that I liked. As it turned out, the time glass, not only was I able to win some new friends who were music fans, but I also found some video game addicts. In 8th grade, I was quite shy but strong in my two best friends. Eventually, they'd be the homecoming queens in the coming years, which is beautiful. We had an amazing time. However, as Valentine's Day was approaching, I, being a nerd, literally did not pay much attention. The ridiculous idea of sending personalized carnations was implemented at the school. You could send them to any of your classmates. On that Valentine's Day, I was completely sure I was not going to receive any carnation flowers. In the gym class, however, I heard my name being called and the person delivering the flowers arrived. My first impression was that it was a prank. I was silent, thinking I must have been mistaken. Eventually, I received a peach carnation that had been delivered to me, and my classmates were pointing at me. That morning, I was so flattered. As lunchtime rolled around, I couldn't wait to tell my two nosy friends. They were shocked to see me with the flower, but not belittling me or anything. They were thirsty for the truth of who my real love was. At the end of lunch, a boy named Josh, who was a possible candidate in my mind, was overwhelming. My knowledge about him was very little anyway. We have art and the math sessions in common. Josh was very calm and nerdy. By the way, I saw him playing Super Smash Bros. Pretty well, one of the games he is a big fan of. I was fascinated by the art project he had worked on. I started imagining that Josh could be my boyfriend. I thought it would be so cool to play video games and draw legally. My friends thought it was Josh who had sent the secret flower. They told me that some boys were talking with him. He had bought the peach carnation for someone, but refused to disclose whom it was. He was the one who did it. For several days, I remained in the position of waiting for Josh's opening up to interact with me. To summarize, I had a great liking for him in art class. I was not in charge of checking the flowers. I was getting concerned we were not thinking right about this. I could not summon the courage. The idea of having a boyfriend filled me with anxiety. Overall, I was just waiting a few weeks patiently, and Valentine was a great thrill for me. However, afterward, I realized that the assertion was wrong. I was also too accepting of the fact that my Valentine was absent forever. Afterward, I forgot the entire matter. The days went on without me retaining it. It was in a class session that chance made me cross ways with a set of the most fashionable kids who were right in discussions. I could listen to their murmurs. They seemed to be mourning for a student who had previously handed out some notes in class. It is said that they were keys to death messages that were supposed to be sent to kill the school. I did not notice those notes before. I reached that conclusion after their talk ended, and they were talking about Josh. I was not so eager, yet I revealed the name of the unfortunate one. I felt unwell after that, and I realized how stupid I was to even think that no one would report a shocking case like this. Still, I told the counselor and my parents. They were in danger of my safety. I did not hear from Josh again after that event. My next time he was not at school, his expulsion was what H got. No one really knew the reason for a no-crime act. A question nags me. It might be silly and very sentimental. Nevertheless, I sometimes wonder whether H actually wanted to be a violent killer or just someone to chatter with on Valentine's Day. This is not the cause of my guilty feelings, though it really freaks me out. The owners of the maintenance company where we all lived were my mom and stepdad. We were living in a remote rural area far away from the city. The other towns in the vicinity were very small, and the inhabitants were all pretty close to one another. This community appreciated the value of trust. My parents had the local boys around for all the work. It was a small town, but we had the southern hospitality habit, and it wasn't difficult to get kids to eat together at all. John was 24 years old at the time, and he had just come to us from New York City. John was somewhat awkward, but honest about his work. At first, he appeared to be a nice guy. I was the 11-year-old girl at that time. One day, he had dinner with us after a day's work with my parents. My sister is only a few years older than me. I felt very unhappy because I had lost my friend who was 2 years younger than me. So I felt very grateful there was John, my comforting big brother, who was listening to my school problems quietly while the family was having dinner. John was loved by our family, and they were always sending him to do different things for them. John indeed felt at home in my family, but they all thought that he was just helping them. For 2 months, John was our handyman in September. My birthday was just ahead. My family had offered to take me bowling. My parents' one-lady tradition was to take me bowling. So the big event of my birthday was John, but my instinct was not the slightest bit creepy due to the fact that I barely knew him. There was nothing I could say to spoil John's fun since he was so nice. We always participated in the fire department as a family, a tradition of ours. We had been volunteering for a haunted hayride event that supported the fire department where children dressed in devilish incidents and scaring the customers were featured in the woods. 3 weeks after my birthday was the next event in which we would participate. Mom told John about the setup of the haunted hayride, so John asked if he could help out as well. Mom referred him to the man who bore the watch for the group. John was in my zone of work with me. Rewinds, also known as CD audio players, are quite a rarity today. As with time, MP3 files and MP3 players have become the primary medium of recording and listening to music. I also believe that the Starbucks company sucks. Its growth rate makes me think that it is a failure of our culture. The unmistakable taste of a well-set coffee along with a baked good is a first best combination ever. The devilish pastries are fresh and all are baked with butter, which gives them a more delicious taste than other products baked with margarine. A cup of coffee in Starbucks, then you must try the chocolate croissant. It's too good to miss. If you really want to feel the pleasure of satisfaction, you have to try it because its taste is truly amazing, as the sweet of the chocolate and the bitter of the coffee make the perfect match. The iced coffee drink is truly the limit when it comes to choices. Now, it should be mentioned that the same coffee is very costly, and the studios use this cheat on the face of clients. I was paying $3.55 for that already developed coffee, and it finally killed me. If customers are not careful with the amount of sugar that they add to our coffee, these cups, like cotton candy, are the exact products the clients think of, and they immediately feel sick. All in all, I can't tell if it is the end of our culture or the poison in our products, but I am seriously disappointed. We had heard so often about the damaging effects of smoking that in the end, I think it did not matter anymore to any of us. It was pretty apparent that smoking is damaging to health, but people are still addicted to it despite being conscious of its consequences. In fact, if we look deeper into certain harmful substances, we can clearly see that violence often comes from smoking. Most of the time, it is young soldiers who smoke, and this fact has led to many serious accidents, such as death and injuries in the army camps. Interestingly, the majority of cigarettes used by youths today are very similar to those that were in use many decades ago. They serve basically the same purpose, and the impact on health is the same. With the emergence of artificial intelligence technology, I am sure a majority of youngsters will stop smoking in no time. Anyway, that's something I look forward to seeing, but I hope that it will be a long time before I have to stop smoking, which is currently one of my greatest pleasures out there. He made his comeback at my age 14. He ordered me to break up with my boyfriend. He assured me that we would once again be a couple. Again, the police were involved. Each day, my mother would accompany me to the police station. A few weeks later, the police informed me that he was detained because of another offense. Before my time in school had actually reached its end, I finished it. As a teenager of the age of 17, I moved to a new place and got a good acting job. October was the month of two shocking incidents. A letter arrived at my mother's